Thanks for joining us, Russ Baker. You are an award-winning journalist. You've written um, Family of Secrets, as well as you're the founder of whowhatwhy.com, which has been featured recently. We read your article on the Columbia Journalism Review. Thanks for joining us here in Mexico.
Sure, I did it before, and here I am again.
And we've been reading about the deep state. And to start us off, can you give us your definition of the deep state or deep politics and why it's so important to study? Because I find here in academia, it's rarely mentioned.
Yeah, as I understand it, and I can't swear to this being correct, but that the term was originated or popularized in Turkey, and that it became a concept actually, I believe, in academia there, where they would discuss the state being the visible state, meaning essentially government and other institutions, labor unions and corporations, things like that. And then there was what they called the deep state, and these were the sectors that are always in the picture, but are not discussed formally when events take place. And so in Mexico and elsewhere would be certain families, obviously the some of those, billionaires. It could be alliances. It could be people who are members of clubs, fraternities, societies of various types where they form social and ideological bonds. It can be any of those things. It can be elements within, in other words, not, let's say, the military overall. It can be elements within the military, or can be not the police overall or a police department, but elements within it. And so you find, for example, in law enforcement that there are these, they're kind of like secret societies. They're groups of people, usually at higher levels, who talk to each other. Maybe there's say people who are commanders in multiple local police departments get together. They know each other and they talk and they kind of share values and they coordinate things. And this kind of thing, this kind of deeper structural, structure is common throughout the world. It's how things get done. And I think it's a very, very useful concept. And without it, we are severely handicapped in trying to even understand or describe how things take place.
And how important do you think, well, I mean, you just mentioned it in the last part, but what about in academia? You mentioned perhaps it originated in Turkey, but what about, let's say, in the U.S. or the Americas? So why don't people talk more about it?
There's almost no discussion of it at all. And my sense is that some people are unaware of this concept, and they're so, I guess you'd say, brainwashed that they literally believe what they teach. And I think there's also some nervousness about this kind of thing. In the United States, you've developed a whole fear of deeper pattern analysis, and they've created these terms for it, these negative terms, or we call it pejorative terms, that are used. And so when you begin talking about these things, they immediately confront you, whether you're a professor or you're a journalist, and they say usually, are you a conspiracy theorist? And this meant that you're hallucinating, that you're imagining things that are there and so forth. Well, of course they're there. These things exist. And I always say, well, if you take whether it's, Freemasonry, I don't know how you say that in Spanish, but I'm sure there's Freemasonry in Mexico, or groups like Opus Dei in the Catholic Church and so on. These are all these sort of semi-secretive orders and groups where wealthy people, by and large, although not all of them tend to come together. They have as they say, a similar mindset, and obviously they exist. So if you don't talk about them at all and you act like they don't exist, you're really in denial. And at least the people in those networks think that they're important, which is why they belong. So academia, I think there's a lot of fear. I don't know. I don't remember your story of why you're teaching in Mexico in particular, but I do know that what you're doing, even talking about this, even inviting me to speak in itself is quite striking, because I get very, very few requests to lecture at academic institutions in the United States?
Well, related to the deep state is JFK, and we've been citing Family of Secrets as well, referencing as well as JFK and the unspeakable, and unspeakable couldn't be a better description because, as we just discussed, nobody talks about these issues, but we find them of key importance regarding U.S. Foreign and domestic policy. There's ample evidence that exists to put general blame on some actors, the military-industrial complex, the CIA, or the Dulles brothers, or Lyndon Johnson, or as you referenced, the Bush dynasty. And you recently wrote about on whowhatwhy.com the list of still classified JFK assassination documents. So maybe if you can tell us a little bit, why is JFK still so important, as well as that list that you guys wrote about?
So, okay, I mean, again, by the way, your class, are your students Mexican or are they from elsewhere?
This semester, usually it's mixed, but this semester they're all Mexican.
Okay, great. Well, so I don't know how much you all know about this, but I mean, in Mexico, you have things happening all the time where certain people become the leader of the PRI or PAN, or I don't know, whichever the parties are these days, and or they become the defense minister or something. How do certain people get in those positions? Well, there's always power struggles going on. This is true in, probably Starbucks Mexico. You have it in all sorts of organizations. You probably have it there at your university, the power struggles in student government and what have you. It's just a normal state of things. And so in the United States, we kind of act like there is no such thing. And it's all, all the arguing during the campaign. You're all seeing Donald Trump and all these other characters. And then supposedly when it's over, everybody makes nice and we all get down to the business of governing the country. But of course, that's not really the way things work. Very, very powerful, very rich people are constantly involved in trying to influence the government so that they win. And presidents go along or they resist. And a lot of us who've researched John Kennedy believe that he was really quite a radical, actually, and that what he did threatened many, many powerful, wealthy interests. And after studying this for a great long time and looking at all the particulars of the behavior of the security services on the day that Kennedy was killed, the failure to actually investigate the evidence of who this Lee Harvey Oswald, the accused killer, actually was, almost every serious researcher that I know of has concluded that we were not told the real story, that Oswald was either caught up in something much bigger than himself or was not witting at all or participant at all in the assassination. And so obviously, if that could go on, then that kind of thing could go on still, especially since we don't solve the mystery itself. We don't acknowledge, we don't figure out what happened. And the way I would explain it is that if you don't fix things, they continue. I mean, it's just like in a bad relationship. If you have an abusive partner and you ignore it, I mean, the abuse doesn't stop. It's whatever it is, these things are endemic and they have to be addressed. And so I would equate it to sort of saying, like, if you imagine that democracy needs pipes and plumbing, but that something like the Kennedy assassination is when the pipes get blocked. And if you don't clear that, everything just backs up. And I and many other people believe that we don't actually live in a real democracy in America, that what happened to John F. Kennedy was basically un golpe, and that golpe continues to the present day, that the people who make a lot of the decisions are these military, these banks, these oil companies, and so forth. I'm not suggesting it in a neat formula. I don't subscribe to the idea that there's a small permanent group of people who are doing these things. It's more a shifting alliance, una alianza of interests. And they also battle with each other, and they try to harm each other, and they file lawsuits against each other, and these things change from time to time. The elections are real, although I think people try to influence them or maybe even steal them. And certainly a country like Mexico, I think you have a lot of vote theft. I think it's pretty commonly understood. The candidates, they are real candidates. They do say what they want to say. They may or may not believe it. They're all raising money. But the point is that no matter what they say, when they get into office, they are limited in terms of what they can actually do. And that's because of the constraints imposed by this deep political structure that simply won't permit big changes. So, for example, the United States always seems to be in wars, always, and there's like almost never been a period in the last 40, 50, 60 years where there weren't wars going on with the United States military there. And the question is, does that always necessary? And, who benefits from that kind of thing? And so presidents, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they basically seem to have to sort of agree to let these wars keep on running, keep on starting. Another thing is the rich and Wall Street and the bankers and taxes, that they have to pretty much agree not to go too aggressively after los ricos. And this is where I think Bernie Sanders stands out somewhat differently, and why I think he scares the system, and why a lot of people worry that if he were to win, that, could something bad happen to him.
And I'm going to read a student question that was posted, but if anyone has a specific question on JFK, come on up right now. But I was going to read, someone posted, shall we ever meet a president like JFK who stands with ready to confront this power that you just described, who seeks to favor peace rather than the wars you just described or the military-industrial complex? In this election cycle, I don't know, you mentioned Bernie Sanders. What are your thoughts in this election cycle or for the future? I mean, it's been decades since someone like JFK.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who have some of the same characteristics of JFK, not the whole package. I don't think anybody would say Bernie Sanders looks like JFK. But he has made a choice not to talk too much about the military and the wars and so on. Although in the last several debates, if you watch them, you would have noticed that he began addressing that much more. And he began speaking out against these wars, criticizing Hillary Clinton's support for them. So, I think he's in line with a lot of those values. I think we had a few other presidents. Jimmy Carter actually was a guy who was an obscure governor from a fairly small state who was picked by the power structure to be the next president. And when he got in, he tried to do what he thought was right, and they didn't like that, and they kept him just to one term in office. So I think there have been a number of people who had those attributes. I think that Bernie Sanders is probably the most sort of revolutionary in that sense, at least since JFK. But again, I think he's got to be a little bit careful. He's trying to keep his message very much focused on this, what we call the 1%, the wealthiest, the injustice in the financial system, inequality, poverty. He wants to kind of stay focused on that. And I think he and his advisors decided that they couldn't get into all these different issues while campaigning.
Okay. You want to come stand over here? We have a question.
Hi. So my question is, we saw this video where JFK said that the CIA should be splintered in 1,000 pieces. And I was wondering, is it now even possible to splinter the CIA, or is it so powerful now that it can't be destroyed?
That's a fine question. It seems like it's almost impossible at this point. Entities like the CIA, the FBI, the National Security Agency, and there are a few others, they really kind of run on autopilot. They really kind of do what they want, because who can tell them not to do it? The president is only in there for a short time. He or she may not know what to do or how to do it, may not be able to do it. And of course, these are secret agencies. So although they certainly are required to reveal certain things about what they do, there's an awful lot that they do that they never tell the president. Jimmy Carter was the last one who really tried to take on the CIA. He put in his own man to run the CIA, and they began working against him within the agency. The people there started trying to prevent him in subtle ways from succeeding. So it's a really big problem. And the question is, in a so-called democratic society, how do you get control over an entity like this that has so much power, so much money, so, as a holder of so many secrets, can potentially blackmail politicians? I mean, that's a really big issue. I think politicians are terrified because we live in such a Victorian society, and there's such a phobia about sex issues, particularly, and they all pretend that they have a perfect marriage and everything's wonderful, And so if anything comes out that it's not quite the case, they can be destroyed. To my mind, we need to kind of break through all of these things and protect people so that they can't get, in trouble with the public over things like a marital affair or if they're gay or anything else. All these things need to be taken off the table, because if you take all the so-called secrets off the table, then there's no possibility for blackmailing these people. And when there's no possibility for blackmailing them, then it reduces the arsenal of things that agencies like that are able to use against them.
Other questions on JFK? You guys posted a bunch. Come on. Sorry, our video keeps shutting off.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Jose David, and I would like to ask you something that maybe could be in the future. Do you think that in the future someone like, Kennedy comes? Do you think that they will do the same thing to him or not?
It's very hard to know, of course. I think that there were a number of circumstances that put him in a sort of a unique position where there were more things going on. There were more powerful people of different kinds who were alarmed about different things. I don't know that there has been a situation since then where so many powerful forces were so angry at the same person for so many different reasons. By the way, I am working on a new book which is about Kennedy and the Kennedy assassination, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to answer some of these questions about what exactly happened. Are there other Kennedys in the wings? I think there are, but to be a Kennedy, you also have to have a lot of charisma. And a guy like, say, an Obama, a limited charisma, not a tremendous amount, and he's not a big risk taker, really, and so he's not a Kennedy.
Before, we had a number of questions about whowhatwhy.com and your investigative work, but before we touch on that topic, I just had to ask, one of the most astonishing pieces I think you covered was General Wesley Clark's statement of having been told in 2001 that the U.S. would arbitrarily invade 7 Middle Eastern countries, and it seems we are now witnessing a lot of that come true. Yet people still don't seem to understand what is happening in the Middle East. Can you comment on Clark's statement and your work reporting on that?
Yeah, I mean, this guy was the head of NATO, and when he would make all the statements that the system wanted him to make, all the TV cameras were there and everybody was covering it. But when he retired and then he started saying things that went against the system, they ignored him completely. And so that is kind of amazing. And he made this statement, and basically he was confirming that the United States, but not just the United States, all countries serve their own interests. And what they do is they their interests are to what? To have power and to make money. And so when they go into other countries, oh yeah, listen, of course I want, if I go to Mexico, I go because I would like to help, because that's the kind of person I am. And there are people who work for the State Department and so on who are really good people. Okay, that's why maybe they do what they do. But at the top, the imperative of all these societies is business. It's to succeed on behalf of the society, which is usually the people who have the loudest voices and are the most influential people. And so a country like the United States, when they call it a world power, largely means that it enforces its will through action abroad, particularly military action, and it controls natural resources and is able to obtain them at a fraction of their actual value. And this is why, in some ways, poor countries stay poor. So Mexico stays poor in part because Mexico has resources, but it's all sold either by a small number of people, controlled and sold by them, or the people who should be paid for it are not paid or are paid very, very little. So it precedes the United States because the British Empire did that, and the Empire of the Netherlands and Spain and Portugal, and you go on and on and on. Even countries like, people don't realize it, like Denmark, at one point were these great powers, seagoing powers that also plundered. Belgium, I mean, many examples. Brazil. I'm sorry, not Brazil, Portugal with Brazil and so forth. And so this is sort of the way of the world, and we never really talk about it. It's not acknowledged. It may be taught in universities, but it's never acknowledged by the media in real time. In other words, when it's actually happening, no journalists are going to say, hey, aren't we really going into Iraq because we want to control the oil supply, or we're trying to cut off Russia from making a deal with Iran that'll affect the prices. They don't really ask these questions, and if they ask them, they're not invited back to the next press conference.
We have a question about media.
Hello. My question is more about modern journalism and your website of Who, What, Why. How does this type of journalism can impact or affect the behavior of society or government?
Well, we don't know yet because we're still kind of new and we're kind of poor and we're kind of small, but we're hoping that as we grow, more people will know about us, more people will pay attention, more people will talk about what we discover and share it with other people. And usually that is how public opinion is formed, and governments do respond to public opinion. So it's kind of a challenge, and it's particularly for us, it's a challenge because Who, What, Why is a nonprofit. That means it's not a normal media company. It doesn't make money. We don't even have any advertisements. It's all based entirely on people like you, just ordinary people, students, whatever, sending a few dollars a month or whatever they can, and we hope a few wealthier people who agree with the value of truth, honesty, and justice, giving us larger sums. And so it's a difficult formula, but we chose to do that because we want to be as pure as possible. We don't want to have to compromise our work or our values. That's a great question. I just want to ask something now. We've had 3 questions from men. A man teaches the class. I see a bunch of women sitting there. So could any of them ask a question or say something?
They posted a bunch.
See, well, then we get in a situation where then women talk about women's liberation and chauvinism, but then they don't take the opportunity when it's there.
They posted a bunch. Usually, in general, folks are a bit shy. You guys want to ask your questions? You posted? Anyone?
Yeah, but you know what? The one who speaks up is going to be the one who becomes the famous TV newscaster.
And recently, so I mentioned Columbia Journalism Review wrote about you in whowhatwhy.com and your rabid pursuit of the truth. And we're seeing a lot of independent new media organizations, well, such as yours, which has been around for a few years, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with Sybil Edmonds' Boiling Frogs post. They're currently trying to start up there. The article also mentioned The Intercept and other outfits. What's your take on this new media and this, we shouldn't say competition, because the more of you that are out there, the better. What's your take in general on this new media that's starting up? Because, we've got a few students here that are involved in journalism, and they're starting out with newspapers. And so, what would be your advice, and then what would be your survey of the land?
It's really hard to know. There are, I have no idea how many news outfits there were, how many there are. There are new ones starting all the time. A lot of them are specialized. Many of them have failed. They've started, since we started Who, What, Why, many others started and then stopped. And it's very difficult. The funding is extremely difficult, whether they're a nonprofit, as some are, or a for-profit, as others are. We really don't know what's going to happen with this. But it's really like anything else. If it's like opening a restaurant. There are a lot of people need to eat. There are already a lot of restaurants that are successful. There are a lot of restaurants that open that fail. If you want to open a restaurant and compete against the ones that are already successful, you have to be really, really good. You have to have something different, something amazing. You have to have tremendous persistence, never giving up, lots of energy, stay positive all the time, get your sleep and your exercise and eat healthy foods and, keep some balance in your life. You have to do everything right, whether you're starting one of these things or you're even just out there in the workforce trying to succeed, because, journalism is a great career. And so many people want to do it. It's about as exciting as almost anything you could do, because every day is completely unlike the day before. But at the same time, it's harder and harder to find work, to make a living in there. And so I think that individual jobs in journalism are just like these startups, that they're the fittest will survive, basically.
Aya, we have a question from a budding journalist.
Well, I understand that Who, What, Why doesn't take a side on the ideology of the parties in the United States. But personally, what do you foresee for the next president elections in the United States?
I have a perfect record of predicting everything. I have never predicted anything wrong. And do you want to know what my secret is?
No predictions?
No predictions. Actually, you know what I do? I take bets. So somebody will say to me something, and when I'm really, 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 really sure, I'll say, I'll bet you $100 right now that you're wrong. And I don't think I've ever lost one of those bets, because I never take them, because, most people are kind of BSers. They say things, and, you have friends like that, right? They say things adamantly, or maybe your brother or your sister, and they're really bluffing. And so I think really good journalism is not to bluff. It's to be really, really honest. You know what you know what you think you know what you're not sure about. But as far as the election goes, it really is impossible to know. The great thing is, even those deep state elements can't control it anymore, certainly, because when you have all these wild cards like Donald Trump, the crazy man, he's so incredibly fun to watch that, I would almost just give him money, even though I think he's a complete maniac, if I had any money. But, Bernie Sanders is just, he's kind of thrilling to people. He's so honest about the rich and money and everything that people are like, wow, this is great. And these other guys who are more typical politicians can't quite succeed. Normally they would have succeeded more. So we really don't know what will happen here. Of course, Trump is winning so many votes that it looks like he would be the Republican nominee, unless the establishment finds a way to create a technical rule and pull something out, a last-minute trick, let's say, to stop him. On the Democratic side, I think that Sanders really has a chance, but you see, the media in this country tends to favor the more moderate candidates. And so they're trying to convince people that Sanders has no chance, that Hillary is way ahead. And so we just ran an article, I think yesterday or a few days ago, about this issue, where if the media keeps saying Hillary's winning, Sanders has no chance, then what happens is Hillary wins and Sanders has no chance. And so we don't know yet, but so many votes are being cast right now, this week and next week and so on, that it could be all over. Certainly by the end of the month, the whole thing could be over.
And final question, I like to always ask our guests, what words of wisdom, advice would you give for the next generation, for the future political science majors, wherever they end up in your field, in journalism, in the government, in humanitarian aid? What advice would you give?
It's a tough one. I guess I would say one thing that I've learned is do what you think is right and follow your instincts. If you don't trust something or somebody, then that means something. If you're being asked to do something you don't think is right, don't do it. Now, you might not have a job, you might struggle, but I think that having a valuable life involves making those kind of moral decisions and then trying to be smart about it and find a way that you still can survive and do what you want to do and do it in a way that makes you feel good about yourself. So we see in all these companies, I think we saw it with Univision, the big Latin company. They had the same thing. People who said something, they get fired. We had it recently with MSNBC. Look, of course, most people keep their head down so it doesn't get chopped off. But it's not a great life to live with your head stuck in the sand. And I think that the world is changing enough that there are opportunities for people who are feeling heroic. So if you're feeling heroic, I would say be heroic.
And join the fight. I think it's a lot of fun. Well, puno hvala, muchas gracias. I'm going to put in a few bucks into whowhatwhy.com, and I hope other people here do as well as anyone listening out there in the ether, on the internet. So thanks a lot for your time, and best of luck with whowhatwhy.com, which we will be following.
All right. Well, listen, and best of luck to every one of you there in the classroom. And I appreciate your taking your time to chat with me and to put up with me. So all the best.